Imagine this. It's the winter of 1350, somewhere in the heart of Europe. No electricity, no furnace, just a dugout earth oven glowing faintly under the snow. Inside, a family huddles by a clay hearth wrapped in wool, sharing warmth stories and soup made from roots. They didn't just survive, they adapted. They built systems so clever they make modern gear look like a crutch. No backup, no second chances. And still, they thrived. In this video, you'll uncover 15 forgotten techniques that kept entire medieval villages alive, from windbreak tricks to animal fat insulation. These aren't fairy tales, they're blueprints. And someday, if things go south, they might just save you too. The snow came fast. By dusk, Toma couldn't even see the mountain trail. No firewood, no shelter, just a half-frozen goat leg in his satchel. But he'd done this before. He dug a pit into the forest floor, lined it with stones, lit a fire, and waited. When the stones glowed, he wrapped the meat in leaves, sealed it with clay, then buried it all under earth and ash. No flames, no smoke, no smell to draw wolves or thieves. He curled into his cloak and let the ground do the cooking. By morning, the snow was thicker, but under the frost the earth was warm. Steam whispered up from the soil as he uncovered a perfectly cooked meal. Tender, hot, safe. They didn't survive by luck. They survived by system. Toma didn't have a stove. He had a hole in the ground and the knowledge to make it work. Could you do the same if your kitchen vanished overnight? The wind howled through the cracks in the rock. Toma's fire had burned out, and the dark felt heavy. No torch, no oil. But he had fat left over from the goat. He scraped it into a clay bowl, twisted a wick from dry moss and thread, and set it in the middle. With a spark and a prayer, it caught. The flame wasn't pretty. It flickered, sputtered, and smelled like burnt stew. But it worked. The light filled the cave with a soft, golden glow. It warmed his hands. It kept his mind from spiraling into the cold. That lump of tallow wasn't just fuel. It was comfort. It was survival. They didn't survive by chance. They survived by turning scraps into solutions. One goat, one flame, one night less alone. Could you do the same if the lights went out and didn't come back? The rain hit sideways, cold, relentless. Toma had no tent, no tarp, just his wool cloak soaked heavy and all he had left. So he got low. He found a dip in the land, pulled his cloak over his head, and tucked the edges under his knees like a cocoon. The wool stuck to his skin, wet but warm. Wind screamed over him, but inside the shell it was bearable. He added straw to the lining, pressed his knees to his chest, and waited. It wasn't cozy. It wasn't dry. But it was survival. That cloak was more than clothing. It was a roof, a blanket, a second skin. They didn't survive by comfort. They survived by adaptation. One piece of cloth, one bit of knowledge, one more night alive. Could you sleep through a storm with nothing but the coat on your back? The fall was quick, the pain immediate. Toma slipped on whetstone and gashed his thigh on the sharp edge. The blood soaked fast through wool. There was no doctor, no bandage, just him, the mountain, and whatever he remembered from his grandfather's stories. He limped to a clearing, found yarrow growing wild, chewed the leaves, packed the mash into the wound. The bleeding slowed, the sting dulled, the panic eased. Next, he crushed plantain leaves, spread them over the cut like a second skin, tied them tight with a strip of cloak. He waited, and while he waited, he whispered thanks not to gods, but to memory. They didn't survive by medicine. They survived by observation, by remembering which leaf helped, and which one could kill. By nightfall, the bleeding had stopped. The swelling hadn't spread. He wasn't healed, but he was still walking. Could you treat a gash with nothing but weeds, spit, and grit? Because when help's 100 miles away, what you know may matter more than what you have. The fire was gone, just a ring of ash and a few smoldering stones. Toma's breath came out in clouds. His fingers stopped bending. He couldn't start another fire, not in that wind. But the ashes... they were dry, warmish, clean. He scooped them with numb hands, packed handfuls into his boots, rubbed them along his arms and chest. It felt like madness, but little by little the shivers slowed. The ash acted like insulation, blocking wind-trapping body heat. No flame, no spark, just leftovers from last night's fire keeping him alive tonight. By morning his face was gritty, his clothes stained gray, but his toes hadn't gone black. He'd made it. They didn't survive by tools. They survived by instinct, by knowing when trash could become treasure. Toma looked at his soot-covered hands and smiled. Would you think to use ashes when your body's going stiff and the fire's long gone? Sometimes survival isn't about building something new. It's about looking at what's left and wringing one more use out of it. The ground was like ice. Toma had tried sleeping on it before and awoke with his joints stiff as dead wood. This time he prepared. Before dusk he built a small fire, not to cook, but to heat stones. Flat ones, river-smoothed. He stacked them near the flames, turning them slowly like bread on coals. When they were hot to the touch but not glowing, he rolled them into a shallow trench, covered them with dirt moss and a layer of wool. Then he lay down. Heat rose from below, not burning, just steady. His spine relaxed, his breath slowed. For once, sleep didn't feel like a gamble. They didn't survive by luck. They survived by layering heat between stone, earth, and skin. By morning, frost had kissed the ground again, but Toma's core stayed warm through the night. Could you build your bed like a battery if the cold came early and stayed too long? Sometimes survival isn't about fighting the cold. It's about learning how to sleep with it. The sheep were scattered. One wrong step on loose gravel and Toma's leg gave out. Alone, injured, miles from the village. No horn, no messenger, no voice loud enough. But he had smoke. He dragged himself to a ridge, gathered dry twigs for kindling and green pine needles for thick smoke. He built the fire in layers hot base smoky top, then lit it. Within minutes, a thick column rose into the sky, white-gray, straight as a spear. Not fire to warm, fire to speak. He added a second puff, then a pause. Their old code injury urgent, send help. And then he waited. They didn't survive by isolation. They survived by signal, by teaching fire how to talk. An hour passed. Then far across the valley, a second smoke column rose. They'd seen him. Could you speak through smoke if your voice couldn't carry beyond the wind? Because sometimes survival isn't about yelling louder, it's about learning to be seen. The old barn was empty, just beams, dust, and a soft pile of straw in the loft. The air bit at Toma's face. Another freezing night. No blanket. Just that straw and whatever warmth he had left in his bones. He lay down, then stopped. Instead of spreading it flat, he began piling, tucking it around his legs, under his arms, curling into it like a bird in a nest. The straw crinkled. It smelled of earth and old hay, but it worked. Warmth didn't escape. The nest held it close. Even when wind crept through the slats, his core stayed steady. By morning, frost coated the rafters, but inside his little bed of straw he hadn't shivered once. They didn't survive by lying flat. They survived by shaping the world around them. One pile of straw, one idea, one night made easier. Could you sleep through winter if all you had was hay and habit? Because sometimes survival isn't about what you lie on, it's about what you lie within. Rain again. Cold, steady, no place to hide. Toma's wool cloak soaked fast, heavy as wet bread, and twice as cold. But he remembered something. From last winter's butchering, he still had a pouch of old, fat, rancid, sticky, but still usable. He melted it over a tiny flame, then dipped his hands in and rubbed it deep into the fibers of his cloak. Layer after layer, front to back, inside the hood, down the sleeves. It smelled like survival. And it worked. The next time the rain hit, it rolled off like water off a duck's back. The wool stayed dry, his body warmer. They didn't survive with fancy gear. They survived with guts grease and grit. Toma stood in the storm not comfortable but confident, because sometimes what keeps you alive is the same thing most people throw away. Could you wear stink and stay dry, or would you freeze clean? Because survival doesn't care how you smell, it cares if you make it. The firewood was gone. The wind howled like wolves down the mountainside. Toma's breath froze on his beard before he could feel it leave his lips. He couldn't survive this night alone. So he did what shepherds had always done. He brought the youngest lambs close, wrapped his cloak around them, and himself pressed his body between theirs and held still. Their warmth was instant, raw, animal, real. It didn't feel noble. It felt necessary. The ground stayed cold, but the bodies beside him burned like small stoves. They kept his core from crashing. By dawn, his legs still ached, but his heart was beating steady. They didn't survive by pride. They survived by sharing heat, even if it came with hooves and hay. Toma wasn't comfortable, but he was alive. Could you sleep side by side with beasts just to keep breathing? Because in the coldest moments, your best chance might not be strength. It might be company. Fire was life, but starting it from scratch, not always an option, especially with wet hands soaked wood and no sunlight for miles. That's why Toma never let the last ember die. Before breaking camp, he'd scoop a glowing coal from the hearth, nest it in dry moss, wrap it in bark, and tuck the bundle into a hollow ram's horn. It smoked quietly as he walked, held heat like a secret, and hours later still breathed. When the wind calmed, Toma unwrapped it, blew gently, and watched the coal bloom red again like a dragon's eye reopening. They didn't rely on chance. They carried fire with them. No flint, no spark, just foresight and a bit of smoke. If your lighter broke tonight, could you still make fire tomorrow morning, or would the cold win? The fire had done its job, but when the flames died, the cold came crawling back, quiet, slow, and unforgiving. Toma didn't rebuild the fire. He prepared for it to end. Each evening he lined thick clay pots around the hearth, let them soak in the heat like bread in broth. And when the last log turned to ash, those pots stayed warm, radiating back the memory of the fire. He placed one near his feet, another beneath the wool where he slept. They didn't burn. They just whispered warmth. They didn't fight the cold. They stored the heat. No flames, no smoke, no wasted fuel. If your firewood ran out tonight, would your home hold the warmth or bleed it into the night? Toma didn't gamble. He planned. The wind wasn't just cold. It was a thief stealing heat, biting skin, howling like it wanted him gone. Toma knew the fire couldn't fight wind alone, so he gave it help. He gathered stones by the stream-cut brush with his worn blade and stacked a barrier waist-high on the windward side of his camp. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't perfect, but it broke the wind, and that changed everything. The fire stopped flickering, the warmth stopped running away, and for once the cold stayed where it belonged, outside. They didn't chase comfort, they cornered it, with walls made not of wealth, but of wit. Could you build a wall out of nothing but what the land gives you? Because sometimes the difference between freezing and surviving is just knowing where the wind comes from. At first, snow meant danger, wet clothes, frozen fingers, a night too cold to dream. But Toma watched the wild, watched foxes burrow, and how snow muffled their breath like a blanket. So he stopped trying to escape it, and started using it. He packed snow around his shelter, thick, tight, even, like building walls out of silence. Inside, the wind hushed. The warmth stayed. The snow didn't chill him. It shielded him. They didn't fear the storm. They made it work for them. A modern man sees snow and thinks, get away. A survivor sees snow and thinks, build with it. So ask yourself, if all you had was cold and snow, would you curse it or use it? Because Toma knew sometimes the enemy is just misunderstood. Even the toughest winters don't last forever. But no one survives them alone. Toma knew that. There were nights he couldn't gather wood, days he was too weak to hunt. But someone always knocked. A neighbor, a cousin, a quiet hand offering broth or dry moss. And when he was strong again, he returned the favor. They didn't call it charity, they called it rhythm. One family shared a hearth. Another took turns watching the sheep. Even a lone widow down the ridge was never truly alone. They didn't build systems of survival. They lived inside them, not through wealth, through rotation, like the turning of seasons, predictable, shared, trusted. So if the lights went out tomorrow, do you have someone who'd knock? And someone you'd knock for Toma survived the winter, but not by strength, by community. Toma didn't have backup plans, no bug-out bag, no GPS, no second chances. What he had was rhythm, memory, and a system not written in books but passed from hand to hand, season to season. He didn't fight nature, he listened, adapted, and lived through storms we wouldn't last a day in. But this isn't just his story, it's a memory that belongs to all of us. Because survival isn't about toughness, it's about remembering what works, and who we are when the fire dims and only old knowledge stands between us and the cold. So ask yourself, if your world cracked tomorrow, would you remember what Toma did, or would you have to start from zero?